Here's how religion has this effect, in my opinion. It is derived from the childhood of our species, from the bawling, fearful period of infancy. It comes from the time when we did not know that we lived on an orb. We thought we lived on a disk. And we did not know that we went round the sun, or that the sky was not a dome, when we didn't know that there was a germ theory to explain disease and innumerable theories for the explanation of things like famine. It comes from a time when we had no good answers, but because we are pattern-seeking animals, a good thing about us, and because we will prefer even a conspiracy theory or a junk theory to no theory at all, a bad thing about us, this is and was our first attempt at philosophy, just as in some ways it was our first attempt at science. And it was all founded on, and remains founded on, a complete misapprehension about the origins, first of the universe, and second, about human nature. We now know a great deal about the origins of the universe, and a great deal about our own nature. I've just had my DNA sequenced by National Geographic. You should all, by the way, get this done. It's incredibly important to find out how racism and creationism have been abolished by this extraordinary scientific breakthrough, how you can find out your kinship with all your fellow creatures originating in Africa, but also your kinship with other forms of life, including not just animal, but plant. And you get an idea of how you are part of nature and how that's wonderful enough. And we know from Stephen Hawking and from many others, Stephen Weinberg and many other great physicists, an enormous amount now about what Professor Weinberg's brilliant book calls the first 3 minutes, the concept of the Big Bang. And we can be as sure as we could probably need be that neither this enormous explosion that set the universe in motion, which is still moving away from us at a great rate, nor this amazingly complex billion year period of evolution, we can be pretty certain it was not designed so that you and I could be meeting in this room. We are not the objects of either of these plans. These plans don't know we're here. Sorry to say, wouldn't know or care if we stopped being here. We have to face this alone with the equipment, intellectual and moral, that we've been given, or that we've acquired, or that is innate to us. And here's another way in which religion poisons matters. It begins by saying, well, why don't we lie to ourselves instead? Why don't we pretend that we're not going to die? Or that an exception can be made, at least in our own case, if we make the right propitiations or the right moves. Why do we not pretend that the things like modern diseases, which we can sequence now, sequence the genes of, like AIDS, are the punishment for wickedness and fornication? Why don't we keep fooling ourselves that there is a divine superintendent of all this, because it would abolish the feeling of loneliness and possibly even of irrelevance that we might otherwise have? In other words, why don't we surrender to wish thinking? That poisons everything, in my opinion, right away. It attacks the very basic integrity that we need to conduct the scrupulous inquiries, investigations, experiments, interrogations of evidence that we need to survive and to prosper and to grow. And it's no coincidence, no accident, that almost every scientific advance has been made in the teeth of religious opposition of one form or another that says we shouldn't be tampering with God's design. I suppose the most recent and most dangerous one of these is the attempt to limit stem cell research. But everyone could probably think of other forms of scientific research and inquiry, especially medical, that had led to religious persecution in reprisal. Thirdly, it's an attack, I think, on what's also very important to us, our innate morality. If there's one point that I get made more than another to me when I go and debate religious people, it's this. They say, where would your morals come from if there was no God? It's a question that's posed in Dostoevsky's wonderful novel, The Brothers Karamazov. One of the brothers says, it's Smerdyakov, actually, the wicked one, says it. If God is dead, isn't everything permitted? Isn't everything permissible? Where would our ethics be if there was no superintending deity? This, again, seems to me a very profound insult to us in our very deepest nature and character. It is not the case, I submit to you, that we do not set about butchering and raping and thieving from each other right now only because we're afraid of a divine punishment or because we're looking for a divine reward. It's an extraordinarily base and insulting thing to say to people. On my mother's side, some of my ancestry is Jewish. I don't happen to believe the story of Moses in Egypt or the exile or the wandering in the Sinai, and in fact now even Israeli archaeology has shown that there isn't a word of truth to that story or really any of the others. But take it to be true. Am I expected to believe that my mother's ancestors got all the way to Mount Sinai, quite a trek, under the impression until they got there that rape, murder, perjury and theft were okay, only to be told when they got to the foot of Mount Sinai, bad news, none of these things is kosher after all? They're all forbidden. No, I don't think so. I think we can actually have a better explanation in every sense, superior as well as better, that no one would have been able to get as far as Mount Sinai or in any other mountain in any other direction unless they had known that human solidarity demands that we look upon each other as brothers and sisters and that we forbid activities such as murder, rape, perjury, and theft, that this is innate in us. Of those to whom it is not innate, the sociopaths who don't understand the needs of anyone but themselves, and the psychopaths who positively take pleasure in breaking these rules, well, all we can say is, according to one theory, they're also made in the image of God, which makes the image of God question rather problematic, does it not? Or that they can be explained by further and better research and have to be restrained and disciplined meanwhile. But in no sense here is religion a help where it claims to help most, which is to our morality, to ethics. Finally, I would say, not finally because I'm finished yet, I'm not quite done, don't relax. I hope everyone's got a drink, something to eat. But on the poison question, I think there's the real temptation of something very poisonous to human society and human relations, which is the fear of freedom. The wish to be slaves, the wish to be told what to do. Now, just as we all like to think, and we live under written documents and proclamations that encourage us to think that it is our birthright and our most precious need to be free, to be liberated, to be untrammeled, so we also know that, unfortunately, the innate in people is the servile, is the wish to be told what to do, is the adoration for strong and brutal and cruel leaders. That this other baser element of the human makeup has to be accounted for and gives us a great deal of trouble around the world as we speak. Religion, in my view, is a reification, a distillation of this wish to be a serf, to be a slave. Ask yourself if you really wish it was true that there was a celestial dictatorship that watched over you from the moment you were born, actually the moment you were conceived, all through life, night and day, knew your thoughts, waking and sleeping, could in fact convict you of thought crime. The absolute definition of a dictatorship can convict you for what you think, or what you privately want, what you're talking about to yourself, that monitors you like this, under permanent surveillance, control, and supervision, and doesn't even let go of you when you're dead, because that's when the real fun begins. Now, my question is this. Who wishes that that were true? Who wants to lead the life of a serf in a celestial North Korea? I've been to North Korea. I'm one of the very few writers who has. I'm indeed the only writer who's been to all three axis of evil countries, Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. And I can tell you, North Korea is the most religious state I've ever been to. I used to wonder when I was a kid, what would it be like praising God and thanking him all day and all night? Well, now I know. Because North Korea is a completely worshipful state. It's set up only to do that, for adoration. And it's only one short of a trinity. They have a father and a son, as you know, the dear leader and the great leader. The father is still the president of the country. He's been dead for 15 years. But the Kim Jong-il, the little one, is only the head of the party and the army. His father is still the president, head of the state. So you have in North Korea what you might call a necrocracy. Or what I called a mausolocracy, as well, a thanatocracy. Just one short of a trinity. Father, Son, maybe no Holy Ghost, but they do say that when the birth of the younger one took place, the birds of Korea sang in Korean to mark the occasion. This I've checked. It did not happen. Take my word for it. Didn't occur. And I suppose I should add that they don't threaten to follow you after you're dead. You can leave North Korea. You can get out of their hell and their paradise by dying. Out of the Christian and Muslim one, you cannot. This is the wish to be a slave. And in my view, it poisons human relations. Now, I've already babbled for nearly 20 minutes. I'll be quick. It is argued, well, some religious people have done great things and have been motivated to do so by their faith. The most cited case in point I have found is that of Dr. Martin Luther King, who I know I don't need to explain to you about. Two quick things on that. First, he was, it's true, a minister, and he did preach the book of Exodus, the exile of an enslaved and oppressed people, as his metaphor. But if he really meant it, he would have said that the oppressed people, as the book of Exodus finds them doing, were entitled to kill anyone who stood in their way, and take their land, their property, enslave their women, kill their children, and commit genocide, rape, ethnic cleansing, and forcible theft of land. That's what the book of Exodus describes happening, the full destruction of other tribes. It's very fortunate that Dr. King only meant the Bible at the most to be used as a metaphor. And after all, he was using the only book that he could be sure all of his audience had ever really read. That's the first thing. The second is, during his lifetime, he was attacked all the time for having too many secular and leftist and non-believing friends, the people like famous black secularists like Bayard Rustin, A. Philip Randolph and others, the men who actually did organize the march on Washington, which leads me to my third observation, which is this. It's a challenge I've made now in debates with rabbis, with priests of all Christian stripes, with imams, once with I know this sounds like the opening of a joke about some bar, but once also with a Buddhist nun in Miami. I asked them all, here's my challenge. You have to name me an ethical statement that was made or a moral action that was performed by a religious person in the name of faith that could not have been made as an action or uttered as a statement by a person not of faith, a person of no faith. You have to do that. Not so far, I've done it at quite a high level with the religious, no takers. No one's been able to find me that. That being the case, we're entitled to say, I think, that religious faith is surplus to requirements. Whereas, if I was to ask anyone in this room, think of a wicked thing said or an evil thing done by a person of faith in the name of faith, no one would have a second of hesitation in thinking of one, would they? Interesting to realize how true that is and how much truer it's getting. Does anyone ever listen to Dennis Prager's show? He's a slightly loopy Christian broadcaster, religious broadcaster, I should say. He's more Jewish than Christian, Judeo-Christian broadcaster, who quite often rather generously has me on his show. And he asked me a question the other day. He had a challenge of his own. He said, you're to imagine that you're in a town late at night where you've never been before and you have no friends and it's getting dark. And through the darkness you see coming towards you a group of men, let's say 10. Do you feel better or worse if you know that they're just coming from a prayer meeting? This is Mr. Prager's question to me. I said, well, Mr. Prager, without leaving you without quitting the letter B, I can tell you I've had that experience in Belfast, in Beirut, in Baghdad, in Bombay, in Bosnia, and in Bethlehem. And if you see anyone coming from a religious gathering in any of those places, you know exactly how fast you need to run. And no one has to explain to you why. And I haven't had to waste any time telling you, have I, ladies and gentlemen? So I submit to you that it is those who are people of faith who have the explaining to do, who have the justifying to do with if this is indeed the case. If they can't account for anything about the origin of our cosmos or our species, if they say that without them we'd be without morals and make us seem as if we're merely animals without faith. If further, everybody can name an instance where religion has made people actually behave worse to one another and act as a retardant upon the advances of knowledge and science and information, I submit that the case to be made is theirs rather than mine. And we have a better tradition. We're not just arid secularists and materialists, we on the atheist side. We can point through the Hubble telescope the fantastic, awe-inspiring, majestic pictures that are being taken now of the outer limits of our universe. And who's going to turn away from those pictures and start gaping again at the burning bush? We have smaller microscopes that can examine for us the miracles of the interior and the double helix, and the sheer beauty of that. The natural world is wonderful enough, more wonderful than anything conjured by the fools who believe in astrology or the supernatural. And we have a better tradition politically. Against the popes and the imams and the witch doctors and the divine right of kings and the whole long tradition of civic repression combined with religion that's known as theocracy. We have created in the United States the only country in the history of the world written on founding documents, testable, organized, works in progress, based on the theory of human liberation, and the only constitution in the history of the world that says that there shall be a separation between the church and the state. God is never mentioned in the United States Constitution except in order to limit religion and keep it out of politics and put it under legal control. This achievement was described by President Jefferson, whose biographer I am in a small way, to the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut, in a letter after they'd written to him for fear of persecution. By the way, who do you think the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut were afraid of being persecuted by? Anyone knows? No, the Congregationalists of Danbury, Connecticut. People forget what it used to be like. See how the Christians loved each other, how they tried to repeat the European pattern of one religious sect repressing and torturing another one. And as you probably know, the president wrote back and said, no, you may be assured that there will ever be in this country a wall of separation between the church and the state. So I have a new slogan, and I'm taking it on tour. And I invite you to join me in it. And it goes like this: Mr. Jefferson, build up that wall. I don't believe that it's true that religion is moral or ethical. I certainly don't believe, of course, that any of its explanations about the origin of our species or the cosmos or its ultimate destiny are true either. In fact, I think most of these have been conclusively, utterly discredited. But I'll deal with the remaining claim. Is it moral? Again, I can only do Christianity this evening. Is it moral to believe that your sins, yours and mine, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, can be forgiven by the punishment of another person? Is it ethical to believe that? I would submit that the doctrine of vicarious redemption by human sacrifice is utterly immoral. I might, if I wished, if I knew any of you, or you were my friends, or even if I didn't know you, but I just loved the idea of you. Compulsory love is another sickly element of Christianity, by the way. But suppose I could say, look, you're in debt. I've just made a lot of money out of a God-bashing book. I'll pay your debts for you. Maybe you'll pay me back someday, but for now I can get you out of trouble. I could say, if I really loved someone who'd been sentenced to prison, if I could find a way of saying I'd serve your sentence, I'd try and do it. I could do what Sidney Carton does in A Tale of Two Cities. If you like, I'm very unlikely to do this unless you've been incredibly sweet to me. I'll take your place on the scaffold. But I can't take away your responsibilities. I can't forgive what you did. I can't say you didn't do it. I can't make you washed clean. The name for that in primitive Middle Eastern society was scapegoating. You pile the sins of the tribe on a goat, you drive that goat into the desert to die of thirst and hunger, and you think you've taken away the sins of the tribe. A positively immoral doctrine that abolishes the concept of personal responsibility on which all ethics and all morality must depend. It has a further implication. I'm told that I have to have a share in this human sacrifice, even though it took place long before I was born. I had no say in it happening. I wasn't consulted about it. Had I been present, I would have been bound to do my best to stop the public torture and execution of an eccentric preacher. I would do the same even now. No, I'm implicated in it. I myself drove in the nails. I was present at Calvary. It confirms the original filthy sin in which I was conceived and born, the sin of Adam in Genesis. Again, this may sound a mad belief, but it is the Christian belief. Well, it's here that we find something very sinister about monotheism and about religious practice in general. It is incipiently, at least, and I think often explicitly, totalitarian. I have no say in this. I am born under a celestial dictatorship which I could not have had any hand in choosing. I don't put myself under its government. I am told that it can watch me while I sleep. I'm told that it can convict me of, here's the definition of totalitarianism, thought crime. For what I think, I may be convicted and condemned. And that if I commit a right action, it's only to evade this punishment. And if I commit a wrong action, I'm going to be caught up not just with punishment in life for what I've done, which often follows axiomatically, but even after I'm dead. In the Old Testament, gruesome as it is, recommending as it is of genocide, racism, tribalism, slavery, genital mutilation, the displacement and destruction of others, terrible as the Old Testament gods are, they don't promise to punish the dead. There's no talk of torturing you after the earth has closed over the Amalekites. Only till when gentle Jesus, meek and mild, makes his appearance, are those who won't accept the message told they must depart into everlasting fire. Is this morality? Is this ethics? I submit, not only is it not only does it come with the false promise of vicarious redemption, but it is the origin of the totalitarian principle which has been such a burden and shame to our species for so long. I further think that it undermines us in our most essential integrity. It dissolves our obligation to live and witness in truth. Which of us would say that we would believe something because it might cheer us up, or tell our children that something was true because it might dry their eyes? Which of us indulges in wishful thinking, who really cares about the pursuit of truth at all costs and at all hazards? Can it not be said, do you not in fact hear it said repeatedly about religion and by the religious themselves that, well, it may not be really true, the stories may be fairy tales, the history may be dubious, but it provides consolation? Can anyone hear themselves saying this or have it said of them without some kind of embarrassment, without the concession that thinking here is directly wishful? That yes, it would be nice if you could throw your sins and your responsibilities on someone else and have them dissolved, but it's not true, and it's not morally sound. And that's the second ground of my indictment. Michael, you will tell me when I'm trespassing on the time of Dr. McGrath, won't you? On our integrity, our basic integrity, in knowing right from wrong and being able to choose the right action over a wrong one, I think one must repudiate the claim that one doesn't have this moral discrimination innately, that no, it must come only from the agency of a celestial dictatorship, which one must love and simultaneously fear. What is it like? I've never tried it. I've never been a cleric. What is it like to lie to children for a living and tell them that they have an authority that they must love, compulsory love, what a grotesque idea, and be terrified of at the same time? What's that like, I want to know? And that we don't have an innate sense of right and wrong. The children don't have an innate sense of fairness and decency, which of course they do. What is it like? I can personalize it to this extent. My mother's Jewish ancestors are told that until they got to Sinai, they'd been dragging themselves around the desert under the impression that adultery, murder, theft, and perjury were all fine. They get to Mount Sinai only to be told it's not kosher after all. I'm sorry. Excuse me. We must have more self-respect than that for ourselves and for others. Of course, the stories are fiction. It's a fabrication exposed conclusively by Israeli archaeology. Nothing of the sort ever took place, but suppose we take the metaphor. It's an insult. It's an insult to us. It's an insult to our deepest integrity. No, if we'd believed that perjury, murder, and theft were all right, we wouldn't have got as far as the foot of Mount Sinai or anywhere else. Now we're told what we have to believe. And this is coming now to the question of whether or not science, reason, and religion are compatible, or I would rather say reconcilable. The great Stephen Jay Gould, the late great Stephen Jay Gould, said that he believed they were non-overlapping magisteria. You can be both a believer and a person of faith. Sitting in front of me is a very distinguished, extremely distinguished scholar, Francis Collins, helped us to unlock the Human Genome Project, who is himself a believer. I'd love to hear from him. I hope we will hear from him. I don't believe he says that his discoveries in the genome convinced him of the truth of religion. He holds it, as it were, independently. I hope I do you no wrong, sir, in phrasing it like that. Here's why I, a non-scientist, will say that I think it's radically irreconcilable, I'd rather say, than incompatible. I've taken the best advice I can on how long Homo sapiens has been on the planet. Carl Sagan, Richard Dawkins, many others, and many discrepant views in theirs, reckon it's not more than 250,000 years, quarter of a million years. It's not less either. I think it's roughly accepted. I think, sir, you wouldn't disagree. 100,000 is the lowest I've heard. And actually, I was about to say, again, not to sound too Jewish, I'll take 100,000. I only need 100,000. Call it 100. For 100,000 years, Homo sapiens was born, usually, well, not usually, but very often, dying in the process or killing its mother in the process. Life expectancy, probably not much more than 20, 25 years. Dying probably of the teeth after that, very agonizingly, near to the brain as they are, or of hunger, or of microorganisms that they didn't know existed, or of events such as volcanic or tsunami or earthquake types that would have been wholly terrifying and mysterious, as well as some turf wars over women, land, property, food, other matters. You can fill in, imagine it for yourself, what the first few tens of thousands of years were like. And we like to think, learning a little bit in the process, and certainly having gods all the way, worshipping bears fairly early on, I can sort of see why. Sometimes worshipping other human beings, big mistake. I'm coming back to that if I have time. This and that and the other thing. But exponentially perhaps improving, though in some areas of the world very nearly completely dying out, and a bitter struggle all along. Call it 100,000 years. According to the Christian faith, heaven watches this with folded arms for 98,000 years, and then decides it's time to intervene. And the best way of doing that would be a human sacrifice in primitive Palestine, where the news would take so long to spread that it still hasn't penetrated very large parts of the world. And that would be our redemption of the human species. Now, I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that that is what I've just said, which you must believe to believe the Christian revelation, is not possible to believe, as well as not decent to believe. Why is it not possible? Because a virgin birth is more likely than that. A resurrection is more likely than that. And because if it was true, it would have two further implications. It would have to mean that the designer of this plan was unbelievably lazy and inept, or unbelievably callous and cruel and indifferent and capricious. And that is the case with every argument for design and every argument for revelation and intervention that has ever been made. But it's now conclusively so because of the superior knowledge that we've won for ourselves by an endless struggle to assert our reason, our science, our humanity, our extension of knowledge against the priests, against the rabbis, against the mullahs who've always wanted us to consider ourselves as made from dust or from a clot of blood, according to the Quran, or as the Jews are supposed to pray every morning, at least not female or Gentile. And here's my final point, because I think it's coming to it. The final insult that religion delivers to us, the final poison it jets into our system. It appeals both to our meanness, our self-centeredness, and our solipsism, and to our masochism. In other words, it's sadomasochistic. I'll put it like this. You're a clot of blood, you're a piece of mud, you're lucky to be alive. God fashioned you for his convenience, even though you're born in filth and sin. And even though every religion there's ever been is distinguished principally by the idea that we should be disgusted by our own. Name me a religion that does not play upon that fact. So you're lucky to be here, originally sinful and covered in shame and filth as you are. You're a wretched creature. But take heart. The universe is designed with you in mind. And heaven has a plan for you. Ladies and gentlemen, I close by saying, I can't believe there is a thinking person here who does not realize that our species would begin to grow to something like its full height if it left this childishness behind, if it emancipated itself from this sinister, childish nonsense. And I now commit you to the good Dr. McGrath. Thank you. The reasons for atheism, or as I would prefer to say, anti-theism, are, I would say, as follows. The first and the simplest objection to religious belief is that its metaphysical claims are not true, in fact are false, and come from a period that I would describe as the infancy or the fearful childhood of our species, when, because we have brains that seek for information and seek for explanation, brains that even now prefer a conspiracy theory to no theory at all, and are bound to do so, and indeed in some ways a right to seek in this way, explanations had to be found for things that seemed at the time inexplicable. And in the absence of crucial information, we didn't know, we had no way to know that the Earth went around the sun. Didn't know that there was a germ theory that would explain disease. Didn't have any means of knowing that earthquakes were the result of living on the crust of a cooling planet in a rather odd solar system where most of the planets are either too hot or too cold to support life, and our own is in large part too hot or too cold to support it either, and where the remainder lives on a climatic knife edge, and always has. Some design, by the way, and that's just of one solar system. We didn't know that matters of this kind, earthquakes, waves, disasters, were not punishments. It was quite possible to listen to those and even to believe those who thought that they could explain. But for these people, a double problem arises. There is first the difficulty of, if not the impossibility, of demonstrating the existence of any creator or designer at all. I think I say something uncontroversial when I say that no theologian has ever conclusively demonstrated that such a designer can or does or ever has existed. The most you can do, by way of the argument from design, is to infer him or her or it from an apparent harmony in the arrangements. And this was at a time when that was the very best that, so to speak, could be done. But religion goes a little further than this already rather impossible task and expects us to believe as follows: that the speaker not only can prove the existence of the said entity, but can claim to know this entity's mind. In fact, can claim to know it quite intimately, can claim to know his or her personal wishes, can in turn tell you what you may do in his name. A quite large arrogation of power, you will suddenly notice, is being granted to the speaker here. The speaker can tell you that he knows, he cannot tell you how, but he can tell you that he knows, for example, that heaven hates ham, that God doesn't want you to eat pork products. He can tell you that God has a very, very strong view about with whom you may have sexual relations, indeed, how you may have sexual relations with others. He can indicate, perhaps a little less convincingly, but no less firmly, that there are certain books or courses of study that you might want to avoid or treat with great suspicion. Now, this suggests to me already a design. I think I can see a design shaping up here, and I think I can see who designed it and created it. I think it was man-made. I think the whole inference, because you can certainly see a design at work, is that this is human, that it was designed at a time of great distress and great ignorance, and that it had an enormous advantage, the design of which can be inferred from every one of its practices. It gives to people, ministers, priests, rabbis, shamans, whoever's cell phone that is should know that we know where you live, by the way, and where your children go to school. It gives to those people power in the here and now, the only place where it really counts. If you are His Holiness the Pope and you have arrogated to yourself, for example, the power to bind and to loose and to decide who may read what and how many tithes must be paid, how many holy days must be observed, how many disciplines must be followed, are you seeking power in the hereafter, or are you seeking it now? It seems to me very obvious that, inescapable conclusion, that it's temporal power that's being talked about. And of a very dictatorial kind, I might add, an absolutist kind, a kind that is not open to the ordinary challenges. The divine right of kings was something you had to challenge not just at the risk of your life, which might end quickly, though the end itself would be slow and painful, the end would be final, but you were told you risked your immortal soul and the rest of your life too. That's quite a powerful instrument of secular discipline. And everyone can name their favorite example, I think, of how and where that kind of tyranny over the minds as well as the bodies of men was exerted. We think of it as belonging to our prehistory, but we only have to look as far as today's Iran, for example, to see a classic theocracy, a country from which I've recently returned, where I wondered how to convey sometimes the flavor of what theocracy really is like. Well, if you're a woman who gets in trouble with the regime and has committed a capital offense in Iran, but you're underage, you're a virgin, you may not be sentenced to death under the law of Iran because the law forbids the execution of virgins. But you may be raped by the Revolutionary Guards so that you're no longer a virgin in the prison and then executed. I think that sort of conveys what people feel they're allowed to do when they think they have God on their side. And I could tell you far worse than that about what the arrogance of power is when it thinks it's backed by the divine.
In the beginning of the video, Christopher Hitchens talks about the hubris among religious individuals, the religious dogma that insists we are the pinnacle of creation, that the cosmos was made for us, or at least with us in mind. However, as Hitchens goes on to point out, the cosmos always begs to differ, man. Consider Earth's resume for starters. It's tried to kill us with ice ages, super volcanoes, magnetic field reversals, and so on, man. And space is even worse. Gamma ray bursts could sterilize the planet tomorrow and the universe wouldn't even blink. I actually highly doubt we'd even notice it, man. Viruses, Picasso, like an afterthought. And that's just the beginning, man. So the so-called fine-tuning argument for life is pure nonsense, at least according to me. If this universe was pre-designed for us, then it's shockingly incompetent. So basically, I guess my point is our existence today isn't a divine plan, man. It's a series of narrow escapes, and yet we persist, not because a god intervened, but because we fought back through science, cooperation, and reason. Those were our tools, man, not miracles. So with that out of the way, let's begin with a humbling fact in this section of the video, man. As far as we can logically tell, we are accidental, not special, not preordained, just a wild, improbable arrangement of atoms clinging to a rock, hurling through a vacuum at tens of thousands of miles per hour. The universe didn't expect us, and it clearly doesn't care if we survive or not. And yet, here we are, thinking, questioning, and even moralizing, man. I mean, think about it, ladies and gentlemen. We've decoded DNA, landed on the moon, and eradicated smallpox. We did that, not prayers, not sacrifices, but only human ingenuity in spite of a universe that's utterly indifferent to our fate. So I think that's something worth noticing, man. And actually now onto the crazy claim that we'd be morally adrift without the holy books to guide us, Bible, the Quran, etc., that we wouldn't be able to tell right from wrong. Now I want you guys to remember that the people who usually make this claim are referring to the same books that endorsed slavery, genocides, and witch burnings, which are basically some of the worst things humanity has been capable of in history. And I actually think I remember one time William Craig making the argument that morality was written in our hearts, and that's why even cultures that have never heard the word of Jesus Christ are capable of goodness. And when he made that point, I wish someone had asked him, then why did some cultures in history believe in some of the most effed up rituals, man, including but not limited to cannibalism, child sacrifice, etc. The fact these were culture-wide issues in some societies implies the people within those societies actually believed in their hearts that what they were doing was the right thing required of them for their survival or whatever. So did God just forget to encode divine morality within their hearts? What happened, man? That's a sensible question, I believe, ladies and gentlemen. So basically, to conclude, all I know for a fact is that ethics predate religion and empathy is older than scripture. When a child shares food when a stranger risks their life to save another, that's not Deuteronomy at work, man. That's evolution. We are social animals, and so cooperation has always worked tribes that cared for each other outlasted those that did not, and over millennia that became conscious. Religion did not invent mercy, it monopolized it. And what's even worse, ladies and gentlemen, is that, as Hitchens points out within the same video, even if it were true that we derive our morality from religious texts, there will be one problem, man. If your morality comes from fearing hell, it's not morality at all, it's coercion. So yeah, I think that should put that to rest. Now let's talk about the arrogance of divine privilege. The arrogant idea that an omnipotent being micromanages our lives while ignoring serious issues in need of his attention, such as state-sponsored genocides in the Middle East, childhood leukemia, devastating natural disasters, etc. The idea that the creator of 200 billion galaxies is obsessed with our sex lives or what we do in our bedrooms is a staggering level of narcissism, man. And meanwhile, secular societies, the ones supposedly morally adrift, have the lowest crime rates and the strongest human rights. We are all witnessing the quick erosion of basic human decency in the US under the leadership of a supposedly Christian administration. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for bringing politics into this, but it's a relevant point that I think we should all reflect on. I recently came across a story where an illegal immigrant mother who has a child that's a citizen that was receiving cancer care was deported. Now, wouldn't the Christian thing in this situation be to let the mother and the child stay? Let the mother take care of her child in a country, a first world country, whose health standards will improve dramatically, if I say so, the chances of the child surviving, man. Or is that a crazy expectation? So I guess my point is Scandinavia isn't a hellscape theocracy, because when morality is negotiated by humans and not dictated by an Iron Age text, it adapts. We outlawed slavery, we granted women rights, we're learning, and it's something that we should do. So, to close off this video, the bottom line is, atheism isn't despair, it's liberation. If this life is all that we have, then it's precious. Every act of kindness, every moment of love matters more, not less, man. And at the end of it all, there is no cosmic judge keeping score, just us trying to leave the world better than we found it. And isn't that noble, ladies and gentlemen, to do good because it's right, to fight injustice because it's unjust? No heaven, no hell, just humanity, man, flawed but striving. Come on, man. I think that's an honorable realization in the universe. Anyway, thanks a lot for joining me today in today's video. I really hope you've enjoyed it as much as I did creating it. Please leave a comment in the comment section below letting me know if you'd like to see me feature a specific video or specific individual, man. Otherwise, thanks a lot. Stay blessed. I'll see you again in the day after tomorrow's video.